My sister mocked me for marrying a nobody. At the family gala, she introduced her husband, an assistant manager. Then my husband walked in, shaking hands with the governor. "That's your nobody?" she stammered. I smiled and said, "Yes, and he owns the building we're in." "You married a nobody," she said, loud enough for the entire table to hear. It was supposed to be a casual Sunday lunch, just sandwiches, iced tea, and small talk. But with my sister, nothing ever stayed casual. She had a way of turning every gathering into a performance, and she always made sure she was the star. That day, her spotlight came at my expense. I was mid-sip when she said it. I didn't choke. I didn't flinch. I just set my glass down and smiled. But inside, something twisted. Not because I hadn't heard worse from her before, but because this time she said it in front of everyone. My aunt chuckled awkwardly. My cousin looked down at her plate. My mom gave a tight smile and changed the subject. But the damage was done. My sister leaned back in her chair, clearly pleased with herself. She didn't stop there. "I mean, he's nice," she added, waving her fork like a wand. "But what does he even do? I've never seen him at any of the family events. Is he still, what was it? Freelancing?" I didn't answer. I didn't owe her one. But I could feel the heat rising in my chest. He turned to my uncle. "My husband just got promoted to assistant manager at Sterling and Company. He's overseeing 3 departments now. It's a big deal." She said it like she was announcing royalty. Her voice was syrupy, proud, rehearsed. She listed his responsibilities like she was reading a resume. I nodded, letting her have her moment. But I noticed how she looked at me, like I'd settled. Like I'd failed. That look stayed with me longer than her words. I didn't respond. I didn't defend my husband. I didn't need to. But when we got home that night, I told him everything. "She called you a nobody," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He was chopping vegetables for dinner. He paused, looked at me and smiled. "Let her think what she wants." That was him. Always calm. Always grounded. He wasn't flashy. He didn't care for titles. But he was building something, quietly, steadily. He'd never needed validation. But I realized in that moment I did. I watched him stir the pot, humming to himself, and I felt a mix of pride and frustration. Pride in the man he was. Frustration that the world, my family, couldn't see it. He didn't come from money. He didn't wear designer suits or drive a flashy car. But he was smart. He worked in real estate development, buying, renovating, and leasing commercial properties. He didn't talk about it much. He just did the work. And I knew, one day she'd see it. I just didn't know how soon. A few weeks later, an envelope arrived in the mail. Thick cardstock, gold trim, embossed lettering. An invitation to the annual family gala. Hosted by my sister. At a luxury venue downtown. I stared at it for a long time. I almost declined. I didn't want to walk into another room where I'd be measured, judged, dismissed. But my husband saw the envelope and said, "Let's go. You've earned your place." I agreed. Not to prove anything, but to stand tall in the room she tried to shrink me in. The week leading up to the gala was a blur of fittings, RSVPs, and silent pep talks. I chose a dress that made me feel strong, deep emerald, fitted at the waist, elegant but simple. I didn't want to compete. I just wanted to be seen. On the day of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the neckline. My hands trembled slightly. I wasn't nervous about the crowd. I was nervous about her. About what she'd say. About how I'd respond. I wasn't sure if I wanted her to be humbled. But I knew I wanted to stop shrinking. That was enough. As we drove to the venue, my husband held my hand. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," he said. "Least of all her." I nodded, watching the city lights blur past the window. The building came into view, tall, glass-fronted, gleaming under the evening sky. I recognized it instantly. Not because of the architecture, but because it was his. He owned it. I didn't say anything. Not yet. We walked into the lobby, greeted by soft music and champagne trays. My sister spotted us immediately. She walked over, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. "Glad you could make it," she said, her eyes scanning my husband like he was a coat she didn't order. I smiled. Wouldn't miss it. She led us into the ballroom where guests mingled under chandeliers. The walls were lined with velvet drapes. The air smelled like roses and ambition. I watched her move through the crowd, introducing her husband to anyone who'd listen. Assistant manager at Sterling & Co., she repeated like it was a badge of honor. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct. I just waited. My husband stepped out to take a call. I sipped my drink, chatting with a few distant relatives. Then I saw him return, walking in with the governor. They were laughing, shaking hands. My sister's face froze. She turned to me, eyes wide. That's your nobody? I leaned in, smiled, and said, yes. And he owns the building we're in. She didn't respond. She couldn't. And I didn't need her to. That moment wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. About letting the silence speak louder than any toast. The rest of the evening blurred. People started approaching him, asking questions, exchanging cards. My sister stood still, her confidence unraveling. Her husband looked lost. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. And I had waited long enough. We left early. Not to make a scene, but to leave one behind. As we walked out, I glanced back. My sister was watching us, her smile gone. I didn't wave. I didn't smirk. I just walked away, hand in hand with the man she once called nobody. And I had never felt more seen. We stepped into the ballroom and it felt like walking into a movie set. The chandeliers sparkled like stars overhead, casting a soft golden glow across velvet drapes and polished marble floors. Every table was dressed in white linen and gold trim, with centerpieces that looked like they belonged in a royal wedding. The air smelled faintly of roses and champagne. It was beautiful, no doubt about that. But it wasn't warm. My sister stood near the entrance, greeting guests like she was the queen of the evening. Her gown shimmered under the lights, and her smile was wide, practiced, and hollow. When she saw us, her expression shifted just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but I saw it. Her eyes scanned my husband like he was a coat she didn't order. Glad you could make it, she said, her voice smooth but clipped. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, matching her tone. She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and whispered, try not to feel out of place. I didn't respond. I just smiled and walked past her, my husband's hand resting gently on my back. We found our table near the center of the room. It was perfectly positioned, close enough to the stage but not too close to the spotlight. My sister had arranged the seating, of course. He always did. And she always made sure she was the center of it. The evening unfolded like a script. Waiters glided between tables with trays of hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Guests mingled, laughed, and exchanged compliments. My husband excused himself to take a call, leaving me alone at the table. I sipped my drink and watched her work the room. She was in her element, flashing smiles, tossing her hair, introducing her husband to anyone who would listen. Midway through the evening, she tapped her glass with a spoon and stood up. Everyone, she said, her voice rising above the music, I'd like to take a moment to introduce my husband. She turned to him, beaming. He stood, adjusted his tie, and gave a small wave. Assistant manager at Sterling & Company, she announced proudly. The applause was polite. A few nods. A few murmurs. She looked satisfied. I took another sip of my drink, waiting. Not for revenge. Just for truth to walk in. And it did. My husband returned, walking in with the governor. They were laughing genuinely. Shaking hands. Talking like old friends. The governor clapped him on the back and gestured toward the stage. My husband nodded, said something I couldn't hear, and they both walked toward our table. The room shifted. Conversations paused. Heads turned. My sister's face froze. She leaned toward me, her voice barely a whisper. That's your nobody? I smiled, leaned in, and said, yes. And he owns the building we're in. She blinked. Once. Twice. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at her husband, who was now fidgeting with his napkin, clearly unsure what to do. The governor greeted me warmly, then turned to my husband. We need to talk about that downtown project, he said. Let's set up a meeting next week. My husband nodded. Absolutely. Whispers spread like wildfire. People started approaching him, asking questions, exchanging cards, offering compliments. He handled it all with grace, humility, and quiet confidence. My sister stood still, her confidence unraveling thread by thread. Her husband looked lost, shrinking in his seat. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. And I had waited long enough. One of my cousins came over, eyes wide. "I had no idea," she said. "He's impressive." I smiled. "He's always been." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and glances. My husband never once mentioned titles or achievements. He just listened, offered insight, and treated everyone with respect. That's who he was. That's who he'd always been. We left early. Not to make a scene, but to leave one behind. As we walked out, I glanced back. My sister was watching us, her smile gone. Her posture stiff. Her eyes uncertain. I didn't wave. I didn't smirk. I just walked away, hand in hand with the man she once called nobody. The night air was cool and quiet. We walked to the car in silence, the sound of our footsteps echoing softly on the pavement. Inside, I turned to him. "You handled that beautifully." He shrugged. "It wasn't about me." I nodded. It was about her seeing what she never bothered to look for. He reached over, took my hand, and said, "You don't need her to see it. You've always known." And he was right. That night didn't change him. It didn't change me. But it changed something in the way I carried myself. I stopped shrinking. I stopped apologizing. I stopped waiting for permission to be proud. Because the truth had walked in. And it had stayed. The car was quiet as we drove home from the gala. My husband's hand rested gently on mine, and the city lights flickered past the window like soft reminders of everything that had just happened. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't heavy, it was full. Full of understanding, of peace, of something I hadn't felt in years. 2 days later, my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello." Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't know," she said. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it sit there between us. "You never asked," I replied. There was a pause. A long one. Then she said, "He's impressive." I didn't say thank you. I just said, "He's kind. That matters more." She didn't argue. That was new. We didn't talk long. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. But for the first time, she didn't deflect or dismiss. And that, in itself, was a shift. At the next family gathering, the air felt different. Not louder. Not colder. Just quieter. More careful. People greeted us with warmth. Not the forced kind, but genuine. My husband spoke little as always, but when he did, people listened. They leaned in. They nodded. They asked questions. My sister didn't interrupt me once. She didn't compliment me either. But she didn't mock me. That was enough. I watched her from across the room, laughing, chatting, still the center of attention. But something had changed. She glanced at me often, like she was measuring her words. Like she was aware for the first time that I wasn't just background noise. I didn't need an apology. I just needed space. And I finally had it. Later that evening, after the dishes were cleared and the guests had trickled out, I sat on the porch with my husband. The air was cool, the stars just beginning to peek through the sky. "I think she learned something," I said. He smiled, that quiet smile of his. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe you just stopped needing her approval." That hit deeper than anything. I hadn't won a battle. I'd walked away from one. And that was the real victory. I thought back to all the years I'd spent trying to be enough. Trying to be seen. Trying to be heard. I remembered the birthdays I planned, the dinners I paid for, the times I showed up even when I wasn't invited. I remembered the silence. The dismissals. The way she'd look past me like I was furniture. And I remembered how I used to shrink. How I'd make myself smaller so she could feel bigger. But something had shifted. Not just in her, but in me. I stopped comparing. Stopped explaining. Stopped shrinking. I started living. Loving. Building. My husband wasn't a title. He was a partner. A builder. A man who never needed to prove anything. And I was finally the woman who didn't either. I didn't need the spotlight. I didn't need the applause. I just needed to stand in my own story and own it. That was the ending I didn't expect. But it was the one I needed. And it was just the beginning.